Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night if you happen to be in an Antipodean region, or at least Antipodean to us. We would be the same to you, I guess. Welcome to a brand new Thesis Theater. My name is Dr. Brenton Dickieson, and I teach in our Language and Literature department here at Signum University. Our Signum students, master's students, they have the opportunity to write a thesis at the end of their degree program exploring a topic of their choosing. These thesis theaters are a chance for them to present their research to a more general audience than just the academic sphere, but also a chance to kind of tease out the implications of the work, add in a personal element, and get questions from an audience. And I love these free events, and I'm glad to see some folks here for the conversation, and also let you know, of course, that our Signum University YouTube channel has these events available for the last few years. So I want to welcome Jacob here, and then give some preliminaries, and then let you launch into things, Jacob. And I'm excited about your Logos Faith Subcreation Tolkien's Legendarium piece. So this will be great. All right. So I'm going to do the full introduction to Jacob in a moment, but a couple of notes for those of us attending the session here. The session is being recorded and will be part of Signum's YouTube channel. And that's really Jacob's ongoing contribution to the school's library of knowledge, as well as an open resource for everyone throughout the world. And Jacob is going to present his some ideas, the basic ideas of his thesis, and hit on some points of that will bring clarity, or hopefully open up ideas for us in reading The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. And then after that, I'll ask a few questions. Jacob and I will chat back and forth, and then we're going to open it up to you kind folks for the Q&A session. I would encourage you to use the Q&A box for those questions so that I'm able to curate those questions in an order that makes sense. Okay, so now let's do it. Let's get to the main feature. Okay, Jacob R. Schreiner holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the Sam Houston State University. He first presented at Textmoot in 2019 on God of War and Norse oral storytelling, and then at Mythmoot 6 on What Worms Are Made For, The Cure to Conquering Dragons in C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Then the next year at Mythmoot 7, Jacob presented A Light for the Hobbit Feet, Moral Choices That Defy Darkness in Children's Fantasy. His research includes fantasy, especially Tolkien, the speech act theory, which we're going to talk about today, and interest in Germanic philology. Jacob currently runs a blog called the Tolkienian. You can clarify how I'm supposed to say that, where he analyzes works of Tolkien fantasy and science fiction. Jacob now is presenting a material, as you know, from his thesis, The Logos, or Logos, you can tell us, of Faith, Subcreation Through Speech Acts in Tolkien's Legendarium. Okay, Jacob, on to you. And I believe you have some slides for us to see.
Yes, let me get those up.
Yeah, sure. I like that you're actually in Middle Earth according to your screen.
Yes,
it's a good way to locate yourself. That looks good, and you sound great here on the screen.
All right, cool, thank you. All right, so Logos of Faith, speech acts through subcreation, Tolkien's Legendarium. So the basic premise of my thesis has to do with the power of language and words in subcreation. And this power stems from the creator, who gives us that ability to subcreate, which is reflected in God first commanding for the universe to be. I explore the power of words through speech act theory, which says that in our speaking, we're not just saying something, we are basically doing something. And we subcreate through language, and in our speaking, we produce certain effects in the world. And that same ability occurs in Tolkien's Legendarium, starting with Ilúvatar commanding the world to be, and then Frodo and Sam have that same power to subcreate through speech acts. J.R.R. Lawson is the father of speech act theory, and I use his book, How to Do Things with Words, as the main body of literature for the ideas like expressed in my thesis. With more recent theorists like John Searle and Daniel van der Vecken. Lawson labels the utterances we say into three categories: locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary. And the locutionary act is basically performance of saying something, as in a statement of fact, like saying the cat's name is Garfield. And the illocutionary act is the performance of an act in saying something, as opposed to a performance of an act of saying something. In saying something, there's an effect on the hearer, as opposed to only say something aloud. An example of which I could say, I order you to name the cat Garfield. And so in saying the speech act, I'm giving an order. And the preclusionary act occurs when we say something and it produces, as Austin says, certain consequential effects upon the feelings, thoughts, or actions of the audience or of the speaker or of other persons. So instead of in saying the utterance, the perlocutionary act occurs by saying the utterance. So by ordering the hearer to name the cat Garfield, I may convince or persuade them to do so. So by doing X, I am doing Y. And so those are some of the basic principles of speech act theory that I kind of address in my thesis. To understand how Tolkien can do things with words, I first explored his theory of mythopoesis and subcreation. And he writes in fairy stories that fantasy remains a human right we make in our measure and our derivative mode, because we are made, and not only made, but made in image and likeness of a maker. And this type of creation is what Tolkien refers to as subcreation, creation that's derivative of the creator. And in Mythopoeia, Tolkien writes, we make still by the law in which we're made. And through the logos in creation, humans are given the ability to subcreate through words, using our words spoken in faith to have consequential effects on the world at large. So basically, a speech act is both an act of subcreation and a medium through which we subcreate. And so, considering logos as the word, language is important to fantasy and subcreation, as Tolkien says in manuscript A of On Fairy Stories. Mythology is language, and language is mythology. And so, language and mythology are connected. So there's an incarnational concept of language that we can subcreate through our words and devise an entire mythology with them. And then language helps us express that mythology to make better sense of our world. And the importance of language is also something that Owen Barfield was concerned with, and Tolkien took inspiration from his book Poetic Diction to shape ideas that are present in his Legendarium, which is the next part here, which I look at. Is Owen Barfield argues that language changes over time, and that the older language is, the closer it relates to myth, because the semantics of ancient words were comprised of numerous meanings wrapped up in the one word, which he calls ancient semantic unity. And then Barfield says, in the development of language and thought, these single meanings split up into contrasting pairs: the abstract, concrete, particular and general, objective and subjective. And so the original unity of the word is lost. And then this kind of divorcing of language is important for ancient semantic unity, where words were once comprised of kind of a plethora of different connotations, and then they were used metaphorically and then fragmented over time. And logos is one example of this, and especially important when we consider the several connotations that it has, all of which can be applied to speech act theory. So all of which can be applied to speech act theory, and in the process of God, therefore, is a means that we can subcreate. And so Verlin Flieger notes that the use of logos in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was a word, with the Greek word logos being substituted for the word word, which he says that to John and his audience, logos would have conveyed co-equally with word, speech, reason, organizing principle, and cosmic harmony. And this example is especially important concerning the creation of the world, as logos represents the word of creation, the reason and cosmic harmony that brought together by God. And so the power of logos as the word in subcreation can be attributed to the concept of a singular speech act made by God, which brought all of creation into being. And this concept allows humanity to subcreate through speech acts because of an original logos supplied by the creator, whether in the real world or in Tolkien's Middle Earth. And so as Tolkien the Catholic, draws inspiration for his own creation story in the Ainur, the book of Genesis is most definitely on his mind regarding the word of creation. And the first chapter, the verse reads, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." So all it takes for God is to speak something into existence, and the same is true for Ilúvatar. Another inspiration for Tolkien in the word comes from John's Gospel, where Christ represents the Logos in the center of creation, the word through which God creates the world. As it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And so in the Ainur, the music acts as the Logos through which everything is made. And by the Logos, humans have their being as it represents the word of creation and the organizing principle and reason for existence spoken by the Creator. And according to Mythopoeia, subcreators or humans subcreate by the law that gives us our existence. So the Logos is the divine word to which we use words as subcreated things to call on the divine through prayer to solicit a response to our speech act. This requires faith on our part that we are using language in the right way according to the will of God, and that hopefully there will be an answer ultimately by that prayer. And so Ilúvatar saying Ea is not just a word spoken by the Creator, it's a proclamation, a speech act through which the force of the word has the power to bring creation into being. And by this word, the Ainur can then enter into the world and subcreate. And so faith is also a necessary ingredient in subcreation, because the act of prayer and naming of the divine are speech acts where we use language and faith, that there'll be intercession by a higher power, and therefore there's hope that for an outcome to our speech act. And so for McIntosh, faith and reason must work in tandem, because faith completes reason by offering the promise and guarantee of that which reason desires but cannot on its own attain. But it also is what sets reason on the right path in the first place by providing it with its initial orientating trajectory towards the divine. So just as faith guides reason in the correct direction, there's Logos is the reason for faith and prayer. And that reason stems from having first a necessity in speaking the prayer, and also that it appeals to a higher power's reason that's not known to the one who prays. And then Thistleton notes here that Thomas Aquinas regarded prayer on its various traditional forms as spoken reason or ratio, as well as the assent of the soul. He defined prayer as an act of reason. This is the same concept that where we can, the one who prays must be in alignment with God's divine plan. And then prayer is inherently performative, because the one who prays is looking to do things with their words, which is really to allow God to act, so that the speaker's Logos of faith may be answered. And so to pray is not just to say some words into a vacuous body and hope for the best, but it takes real faith that there'll be an answer. And what Thistleton says of prayer is that prayer offered in faith as an act of entreaty remains nearer to constituting a speech act than to remaining only an assertion or statement. And so prayer as a speech act, it's a speech act because it has the power of subcreation through language that is willed or permitted by the Creator in a moment of utterance. And then if the prayer is a request, God is called to respond to this illocutionary act by answering the prayer. And so going on to Tolkien's Legendarium, in the Ainur, Ilúvatar is the prime mover in creation and makes the Ainur out of his thought. Then the Logos of creation comes to fruition when Ilúvatar pronounces Ea, let these things be, and I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. This is the word that sets all of creation into motion. Ea is essentially it is, or let it be, and the same as God's supernatural declaration, let there be light, and there is light. So by Ilúvatar saying Ea, he's declaring that the world be made, and it's made so because he's declared it. And so the locutionary act is an act of a performance in saying something, which is the action we do. But unless a certain effect is achieved, the locutionary act will not have been happily, successfully performed. And this act leads to the prolocutionary, which is what we bring about or achieve when we say something. And so it's the consequence of our speech act. And so in the case of Ilúvatar, the audience or the force of the words to land on are the Ainur, And by the command, they are encouraged to then set out to make these things be. In speaking this primordial word, Ilúvatar's speech act has the power to establish creation into existence by the Logos as word and reason. And after the Ainur, the elves also put to good use the Logos through language when they first wake in Middle-earth and look upon the stars. Their first reaction is to exclaim El, or behold. The naming of objects is a speech act itself. It's a subcreation that brings reality to the creations of the world. And so at this moment, the Elvish word El becomes a subcreation in the form of language, connects to the Logos as word, and then develops into the name they call themselves, and then shapes their identity. So from the performative act of naming comes the authority of uttering the name. And so in discussing the relationship between the namer and the named, Janet Brennan Croft highlights the fact that the name giver, through giving or using a name, may assert a certain amount of power over the named, or indicate that their equality with, neutrality about, subservience to, or admiration for the named entity. And so in the case of the name Elbereth and how certain characters use it, there's an obvious admiration and subservience present that when Frodo and Sam utter it in faith, it allows for consequential subcreative acts. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Sam connect themselves to the Logos through the spoken word, and they're able to work with the creator through speech acts to subcreate the power to ward off evil. And so in my thesis, I explored 3 other episodes in Lord of the Rings that had to do with speech act theory, but one of the most important episodes of Lord of the Rings is Frodo and Sam's encounter with Shelob in the Two Towers. What's so important about this episode is that they use the file of Galadriel along with their speech acts. And the file sort of acts like a barometer that measures in response to the Hobbit's hope. And so it shines when there's more and then droops when there's not. So when Frodo uses it for the first time, hope grows in his mind, and it gives him courage, and he's able to speak in Elvish tongues, as if another voice has spoken through his. And so that's kind of like a divine intervention that's happened before for Frodo previously. And so through this invocation, Frodo is also performing a speech act, because in speaking these words, there's an illocutionary force behind them to dismiss Shelob. And although he does not see her yet, he can feel her presence. And Frodo exercises power by calling on the name, and uses his words in sincerity and faith and delight to repel Shelob. But at first, she doesn't heed them. Speech act would be called unhappy, as Austin calls it, because the procedure must be executed by all participants both correctly and completely, and the participants must actually so conduct themselves subsequently. So Frodo's sincerity is unmatched by Shelob's insincerity, and therefore the perlocutionary act by Frodo saying the words to repel the spider is canceled. And so once more, Frodo regains his courage and calls out for Galadriel using the star glass. And so in Frodo's invocation, he's rebuking or dismissing Shelob. And then by Frodo's invocation, by calling on Galadriel's name, Shelob is alarmed, and especially so because of the divine light, and then she retreats. And Sam also has a moment of his own when Shelob returns, and he makes a prayer to Elbereth. In this prayer, he's using his faith to invoke the holy name of Elbereth, and then the light shines brighter than ever. And as William Fitzgerald says, if the language of prayer tells us anything, it is that the gods come when they are called. This is the authorizing assumption behind all acts of verbal appeal to the divine. Consequently, one must be serious in using the power of language to draw the divine into human presence and vice versa. And Thistleton says, for serious and sincere prayer commits the one who prays to action, which is consonant with a union of wills with God. And so Sam certainly has this sincerity aspect that's required for a speech act to be happy. And he is in the correct position because he has authority over Shelob, since the power of the divine is on his side. And so Shelob is ultimately defeated by the power of the Logos as the word through speech acts. And this ultimately comes from a higher power that has gifted it to the hobbits, and they're able to use their words in faith to draw back the forces of evil. And that's how we can do things with words that I explored in my thesis.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Jacob. That was quite a tight summary, and I really appreciate this. And folks should know, like, the way that this works in the world is Jacob comes with an idea, and then we think about what professors fit and things like that. And for me, as soon as actually, I think, read the title, I think I knew what this could be. So I really appreciate that. So let's chat a bit about this. Can you or stop sharing your screen,
Oh
and
yeah.
then but if you ever want to refer back to it, we can always just pop that open again. Okay, Jacob.
Yep.
All right. And then as we do this, then folks can, if they want, add some questions to the Q&A box. So it's a fairly a theory-based reading of a story that we love, gives us the ability to kind of re-energize the reading or read with a new lens. But you have like a number of sort of a triangle of concepts here, and let me just break that, and then in putting it back together, see if we can create kind of a mental package that we can then walk around with in our lives, right? So let's begin at the very basics, and you're actually playing a bit playfully with words. Logos has a number of meanings that roll throughout your thesis. What kinds of meanings does that original word logos have?
Well, of course, the main one would be word, like the word of God from, in the Gospel of John, we know that as the word being Jesus himself. But it's also like it could be speech itself, the act of speaking, or the one I use in my thesis is reason, like the divine reason of the divine plan of the entire universe. And so it's like a harmony of the universe in that way. So it's kind of like speech, reason, the word, or words themselves are kind of a cosmic harmony.
Yeah, and you use it, I think, at one point for logic. Like there's a
Yeah.
logic.
Also, logic is looking at kind of like on a rhetoric standpoint, the logic of maybe a paper, but the logic of kind of the universe working as a whole is also something I looked at.
Good. And I think most people would encounter the word logos as just like study of, right? Like psychology is the study of the psyche or the soul, right? So it's good to have those different definitions, and that kind of rolls through your piece. Okay, so that we're going to just park that just for a few moments. So primary world, secondary world, Tolkien's language for where you and I are sitting in digital connection, and the Middle Earth Legendarium space, right? So in the primary world, in Tolkien's view, God creates in Genesis in speech, let there be, and then there is, right? And Ilúvatar says, and it is, right? So that's obviously a parallel. I mean, I don't think we're overdrawing things to make that parallel, right? Yeah. Okay. So we have the two creators of the primary world and the secondary world, and they create in a way, both in the primary and secondary world, that we are to be creators too. Sub-creators is Tolkien's word. Is that's your understanding, right? Yeah. And so in our world, Tolkien becomes the poet, the artist, the writer, the creator of worlds in that sense. And then you use the example in the Silmarillion of the elves creating their spaces, and there'd be a few examples on a large scale, but lots on the small scale, right? Is that I'm getting that parallel, right? Of subcreation.
Yeah, definitely there's a parallel there.
Yeah, no, that's good. So just park subcreation just for a moment. So let's go to speech act as a theory. And for me, I love the examples that you use. You actually, the benefit of the paper is you get to spend 20 minutes reading different examples. I really have from the first time I understood what was going on, I liked Austin's idea and the clarifications, but I have to create kind of like a cheat sheet for myself in order to walk around with the different terms. But the basic one that caught me was a marriage ceremony, and I understood then from there. So the officiant, the minister, or the judge or whatever says, "Do you?" and the couple say, "I do, we do." And in doing so, they do, right? They're doing the thing that they're doing. The minister or the judge says, "You are married," and they are married, right? So those are speech acts that happen in that. So like that's kind of the biggest vision of that sort of thing, right? But you like the research kind of moved on, Austin and people after, like, is like everything we say a speech act?
Uh, that's where I kind of like define or divide things into things that are performative versus just a performance. I mean, uh, John Searle says that everything we say is basically a performance because we're using language and we're saying words and it's basically a performance. But there's things that are performance and then there's things that are performative that John Searle kind of looks at, and you can by performative you say something and something else occurs in the world because of you saying that's something. So basically the perlocutionary act of by saying something, someone else something happens. So then by saying I do in a marriage ceremony, that's performative in the way that you are then married, and so anything like that, like any kind of ceremony, basically a baptism, baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so then you are baptized. And so there's kind of a difference between performative and just like saying something like Austin says, a locutionary act is something that we just say, like, I like cats. And so that's not really a performance in a speech act kind of way, but, saying something like, I order you to go do the dishes or something, it's kind of like it's a speech act which has kind of a consequence by saying that thing. And so that's kind of like a performative thing that we do in speaking.
That's right. So like I think the difference then, so like saying this is a cabbage doesn't create anything in the world if we all know that that's a
Right.
cabbage, right?
It's another thing that Daniel van der Vecken says, it doesn't create a new fact in the world. And so
That's right.
by saying something is a cabbage, it's not creating it a fact in the world. It's just it's a cabbage. But if you're saying, go pick that cabbage, that person you're talking to goes and picks that cabbage. And so that's kind of like a new thing that happens in the world.
Good. So thinking about those, so leaving behind like the statements of fact and the things where nothing happens in the world, the non-performative kind of things, right? So just leaving all those potentials behind, which folks that love reading about that kind of thing can go and do. So thinking about kind of doing things with words, stuff that happens in the world. I guess this is a cabbage is different if I'm naming it for the first time. This is like a North American juniper cabbage that I just invented, right? This is, right. And then it is, right? So that's a kind of a new baby, or you are my friend. These are naming events, right? That name things, or this is friendship, I guess would be a way of saying it. But we can also kind of perform it by saying you are my friend. I might actually create friendship. Is that right? Or this is a joke. If I do it in the right kind of way, I might be saying it, doing a joke and saying it's a joke, right? So it has that inside level. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a command form, do the thing, which may or may not happen in the real world. But the would you call it happy or felicitous? What's when they go and do the thing they're supposed to do? What's that?
That's Austin calls that a happy statement. So it'd be a felicity statement, and then things that go wrong would be called infelicities, or it would be unhappy statements that they didn't occur because of saying the performance of speech.
Yeah. So go pick the cabbage, and you don't want to pick the cabbage. It doesn't happen. Like, so that's an infelicity or an unhappy statement. Okay.
Right.
So thinking of then the naming words, the making words in the sense of you are married, right? You are a married couple or something, or let it be, let the world be, like that kind of thing. Commanding words, we've talked about those, but then you also talk throughout of invocation, summoning, and prayer words. Are those all a category? Like, is it like if I say, hey, Jacob, like that's a calling word, right? And that does a something in our relationship. Is invocation, like, is that a whole category? And where does prayer fit into that kind of group of words?
I think that by calling someone, you kind of create in that person to be motivated, or to respond to their name. And so it's kind of like a performance where you get their attention in that way. But like calling on like God, for instance, it kind of depends on the prayer, I guess. If you're doing like a petitionary prayer, Austin has different words for different kinds of things, and Van der Vecken calls them like you can use directives, which are like orders or asking of something. So if you're doing like a petitionary prayer, you would be using that directive kind of speech act, which would be not kind of ordering God to do something, but you're asking for something. And so your performance of asking God by saying that please let this happen, or if you're just maybe invocating the name itself, could be a way to draw God's attention to for him to act, instead of you're not the one acting, but God's the one acting in that way. And so he's kind of the one performing in that way. And so I guess for prayer and invocation is kind of a basic way of asking God to respond in a way, since you're kind of asking for something in return, and then God will then, I guess it's his prerogative to answer the prayer if he wants to, but then he does act because of that asking.
Right. Yeah. No, that's it. I think prayer gathers a few things, in like a supplication or an asking prayer might be different than like a giving over, like thy will be done, right, is a different kind of prayer, or like the be with me is a different kind of thing, right? Not a directed outcome. In that sense, with prayer, we would, in most cases, we wouldn't know if the act is felicitous, in the sense we don't know if the question is, or the thing is answered, right? Like in the asking, we unless it's very specific, I would like cabbage like in the next hour, which is an unusual prayer from many times and places. But in most of those other prayers, we don't really we presume the felicity, right? Like we presume the happiness of that kind of thing, right? So in your paper, you go through the Lord of the Rings. I mean, we talked about Silmarillion, and that's a cool section, but you do the Lord of the Rings, and there's a handful of moments where Frodo and Sam speak out, Frodo especially, but Sam once as well in a significant way, speak out what you call prayers, right? Calling out in those sorts of moments. And you talked a bit about that, but I think it's worth kind of going into that for a moment. Does something like what's different, that like if Tolkien is saying his bedtime prayers, what's different than when Frodo is in crisis and is calling out? So what's different in that prayer event between those two things?
I think it's really based on, I guess, the situation, in that they're kind of in dire straits here. And so it's kind of like they're using their faith because they want something to happen, and they're kind of expecting something to happen, even though, it might not happen. But I think it's the word of faith that gives them kind of courage that maybe that what God will answer that prayer. And so I guess it's kind of a different situation, in a sense that there's an immediacy to their calling for God in that moment. And so that's really based on the hope that they have and the faith that they have in their words for that, for those acts to occur, because of their asking God for their situation to be changed.
Yeah, and there really is an immediacy. There's also, I think, a destination difference, right? Like, so with the Tom Bombadil, which prayer is maybe a pretty loose term, but the call for help with Frodo and Tom Bombadil, like the first time he doesn't know about Tom Bombadil. Sorry, I've gotten delicious here, but just cries out like help, right?
Mhm.
Basically, and Tom comes along, right?
Yeah.
And so you know that that's a calling beyond what he knows, but it's a
Mhm.
felicitous calling, right? The speech act. The But later when he calls for Tom, he doesn't just call out help. What does he do later when he's calling for Tom?
Well, after Bombadil helps the hobbits, and he kind of teaches them a song that kind of calls on Bombadil. It's kind of like a prayer in a sense that uh, when they're kind of alone on the Barrow Downs, and it's getting they're inside the tomb of the Barrow Downs, and so Frodo kind of he says Tom Bombadil's name. He gets a little bit of courage from those words, and then he goes into the full song of singing the full song and kind of calling Bombadil to help them, and in a way of asking for his help, and it's kind of like, I guess Bombadil is not like this like God in a sense or something, but he has power in his own realm. But I guess when Frodo first says help in the forest, uh, he's not really talking to anyone. It's kind of like it just happens to him. He says it, and so it's kind of like a divine intervention in that sense. And then Bombadil comes along, so it's kind of like maybe God asked, kind of working in that way that Bombadil comes. But when Frodo kind of says the poem there, the song, then Bombadil comes in that moment.
Yeah. But there is like, it's more than that too. Like exactly that other side of it. There's like almost like a tugging side, like a causing to call out. We see this later, right? When he calls out for help, like for light and dark spaces, and
Hmm.
help in those sorts of moments. Frodo does. There is a sense of like almost otherness about it. Like he's not just speaking something he's learned, but discovering something new. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like over time, like from the first time he calls for help, uh, he sees that something is happening to him, that he's not the one calling out for help. It's kind of like I said, divine intervention going on his side. But over time, that happens more and more, and so he calls on Bombadil, he calls on
Hmm.
Galadriel and Elbereth several times, and so it's kind of like he's learning from these words of faith to be hopeful for something to happen, and using these words in faith to that they will happen, that they've happened several times before.
Yeah, yeah. And from the Fellowship of the Ring, for example, one example you give is um, he's being threatened by the Nazgul knife, and or in grave danger, and then he heard himself crying aloud, "O Elbereth, Giltoniel," and at the same time, the narrator says he struck at the feet of his enemy, and a shrill cry rang out in the night. So there's a sense of like hearing himself, like a pulling beyond. Did like did Frodo know to cry to Elbereth? Is that like is that something in his catechism of hobbithood growing up that one does, or is that a completely from beyond experience?
Well, I think that he kind of first hears Elbereth's name when he encounters the elves uh, in the forest for the first time. When he leaves Hobbiton for the first time, he encounters the elves there, and they teach him, or they sing a song about Elbereth, and so that kind of is in his memory, and he knows that Elbereth is kind of like this supreme being to the elves, and she's an important figure. And so I think that when he's in that moment of dire need, there is kind of something in there that calling to him, that uh, he remembers Elbereth's name, and he can then use that power that he has in the name, in saying the name, that then it kind of gives him kind of courage in that moment, and so it changes his situation by him saying the name.
Yeah, and a similar thing when with the Light of Galadriel, and also with Sam, right? So the same sort of thing passes on. There seems to be kind of more going on, but each of those calling ons cause something to happen in ways that are more than just the thing. So it's true that Tom Bombadil pulls him from a tree, but also creates like a Bombadil kind of space and gives him the, gifts and things like that. Or I think the name of Elbereth was, I think, a weapon in a sense, right? In that moment, is that right? Yeah. Okay. The light comes, but then courage comes. Things like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's this word seems to be this logos moment where they cry out in this faith that they can't always define, this trust, this reaching out, is doing the prayer invocation kind of thing, the calling kind of thing, but is also doing a making in the world kind of thing at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, so that would be kind of the definition of a performative speech act, is that it's not just saying something, you're doing something by the saying of it. So by, calling on Elbereth, for example, something is happening in the world, it creates a new fact in the world. Frodo's situation is changed in that moment.
Good, excellent, yeah. And that's what I kind of wanted to draw out. And so let me kind of make just one more connection, and then we'll go to questions without. I know this is not like I'm trying to do this in a way that isn't the logic that you used in the paper, just so I can test the logic of it. Okay, so now returning to the idea of subcreation, creator God in the primary world, creator Ilúvatar in the secondary world, speak, creation happens. They give subcreation power to others. And part of that is those we can make with speech, right? The way that both the elves, at least, but humans in another kind of way in the secondary world, and then us in the primary world, we can make with speech. That's what we talked about at the beginning, right? So it seems to me like this speech act theory is sort of teasing up what is happening, like what you're saying in speech act theory is teasing up is what is happening in subcreation, right? That there is that element. Is that right? It's naming what's happening in subcreation.
Yeah. So because of God, using speech in a way to create the world, he creates humans by the same way of like a supernatural declaration for it to be. And so humans also have that same power of language. And so language is kind of a subcreation in that way, mimicking God's kind of word of creation. And so humans then have that ability to subcreate through language, and that subcreation, and through language, subcreation happens because of that speaking and speech acts. There's a subcreation through that a situation is changed by saying something. That the speech act itself is a subcreation through language, and then something happens because of that speech act, it kind of subcreating the world around us and allowing for situations and things to happen because of our speech and our language and the power of language.
Good. And so that's what I wanted to capture that's in your piece, is that the layered thing. So the hobbit's calling out, but that's a making in the world. That's a reflection of the subcreative space that's been made there, all the while Tolkien is telling a story that is his subcreative act. And of course, with Tolkien in particular, it's a from the word up act, right? From sound or content of a word to words to poetry to myth and to story, right? That's the kind of tree-like movement of Tolkien's creation, right? Subcreation. Yeah. And it's great. And it's like, I don't think it's accidental then that logos is the word used in John for that co-creator, Christ co-creator, but also the creative energy. Yeah, so I think that's important. So that's good. Okay, so let's pop this out. So I think we've got the game plan. Let's turn to some questions that we have here. I just have to make a little rearranging here just to have them in front of me. Turn to some questions, and then we'll come back to kind of like maybe one of the questions we'll do this. We'll come back to kind of the more personal connection when we come. Okay. All right. Oh yeah, Gonberry Gone. Yeah, I bet Kate that autocorrect will never do that super well. Kate Neville writes, during Corey's Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, we're wondering about a part of Elrond's farewell to the Fellowship. He says, Elrond does, farewell, and may the blessing of elves and men and all free folk go with you. It does seem that free folk that they meet along the way do respond well. This is Eomer and Treebeard and Faramir, and even Gunbury, Gun, not Ghanaian, but Gun. They respond well to this. So what in speech act terms and then subcreation terms, what's going on with that blessing? Like what's happening when Elrond does that? Because it does seem more than just, see you guys, right?
Yeah, I think blessings are also a kind of a performative thing in a kind of like a ceremonial type of way. Same way I think as blessings is the opposite of curses. Curses, you curse somebody and it's a performative thing, and somebody is then cursed. Something bad happens to them. That's because of that speech act. Perlocutionary act is then something bad happens to that person. And so the same way I think blessings kind of work in the same way that instead of something bad happening, you're blessing the person, the party, that something good will happen to them. And so that's the speech act of blessing. And then because of that blessing, in saying it, they're blessed in a way. And by saying it, they are then have this, I guess that they are safe from in their journey of perils, and so it's kind of like the perlocutionary act of by saying the blessing. And so I guess that's kind of like there's a weight to that speech act in that way, that it does something for the party involved there.
Yeah, so it is it's an act in that when I say I bless you, I am blessing you, right?
Right.
Or curse, right? Okay, so that works as a happening in the world, the performative thing. Given kind of how there seems to be a number of things happening with those scenes of Frodo and Sam calling out, there seems to be a tug to call out this connection to sometimes a force, a creator, and a divine figure that's unknown, but still a calling out. And then there's something that happens on the inside, courage or hope or something, and then a kind of thing that can happen on the outside, a light. The light shines, the person comes, the words work like a curse or a blessing, right? Which would be the same thing to someone who lives in shadow. A blessing would be a curse, right? So a blessing of light would be a curse, and so it's happening on different things. Is Elrond like doing a magic, and like are they more blessed on each of those levels? So they're blessed in the sense of the hearing, maybe the warming of the heart, but is there also something that then happens? Is there a way, do they fare well or better because of the words? You know what I mean? Does that create that kind of material thing in the world?
I think that, really with that kind of thing, I guess with a curse, you can see kind of the outcome of a curse. Something bad happens to you, but maybe in this way, the blessing, you may not be aware of things that are good things that are happening to you specifically because of the blessing, because they're just happening in the world, and you can attribute that to the blessing itself. And I think if Elrond has like a power to do so in a blessing to bless the people, I think it's really like the power of words themselves in the way that you can then be blessed, and maybe because also Elrond has that power to do so. It also could come from a higher power, Ilúvatar, or somebody that also gives that power to Elrond to then act in that way to bless the person that they're blessing. So that kind of I guess that comes from that power of the words and Elrond's own power to create a blessing, and then I guess it really depends on if then we can see that happening in the world. If we can attribute it to the blessing, if we read Lord of the Rings, and we can see maybe these things are happening because of the blessing in that way, or in real life we can have that kind of sense that because we were blessed, these are the things that are happening to me because of that. So I guess that's kind of where it comes from.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I read as a kid, and maybe still do in a sense. I read Elven blessings kind of like the way magic works more than the way maybe a
Hmm.
religious blessing or curse works or something, in the sense, um and I'll ask about that. But if we think about like Galadriel's, may this be a light to you in dark places, that seems to be a different kind of performative event than just may you be well. And I wonder where may the blessing of elves and men go with you, right? And free folk go with you. I'd be curious whether that falls in between those two in some kind of performative way, or whether it's one or the other.
Hmm.
Um, is magic is magic? Where does magic fall as like a speech act?
I would think that magic is definitely very different than, a regular human being being able to create something in the world. With magic, John Searle calls these things like supernatural declarations. That's what God does himself when he says, "Let there be light." Ilúvatar says, "Ea, the world is created," and humans don't have that ability ourselves. And John Searle kind of also says that we see these things in fairy stories with magicians and witches and in magic. And so that I would attribute magic to these kind of supernatural declarations that are different than a regular human being maybe wanting something immediately, like to say, go do the dishes. You're ordering someone else to do it, but you can't say, dishes, be clean now. That's something that a supernatural being would say using magic in a way. And so I think, uh, Galadriel or any supernatural kind of being has these kind of inherent magical abilities probably with when they say these things. And so that would be kind of attributed to this supernatural ability that these beings have in using magic, as opposed to like or an everyday person saying anything else that they want something to happen in the world.
Yeah. We could have a long conversation about wizards. Elves kind of, in my mind, have a synchronicity natural to Middle Earth that's a little different than just magic. So uh the Silmaril light does a thing in the world, but it's natural to that world. It's not extraneous to the world. Or the soil for Sam to reseed his world, right? His Shire. um that's not alien to Middle Earth. It just happens to be super cool. Shire level, super cool. So there's
Yeah.
magic, invocation, magic, prayer, blessing. Returning to naming, and Kate has a comment here, and I'll just note that we're going to finish within a few minutes, 7 or 8 minutes, and so if you have a question, please do pop it in the box. Kate returns to naming as a question about speech act within the same story. Gildor names Frodo elf friend, right, or quite early in the tale, and then Goldberg sees that, I see you are an elf friend. Like, is that an example of the, like, outside of the large calling pieces, is that an example of subcreative speech act in this space?
Yeah, I think, besides on, calling somebody's name, I think the act of just naming itself, it's a subcreation in that it gives that person that you're naming kind of it becomes that name becomes that person, and so it gives them these characteristics of the name itself. There's like the name means something. The word of the name can mean something, like Elbreth, Star Kindler has these connotations with light. And so Elf Friend also, it gives Frodo this new uh, personality, that he is now himself an elf friend, and that I guess there's power in that, and then others can, I guess, see that also in Frodo as being now this elf friend because of the naming of Frodo himself at the beginning, and then others will kind of see that in him.
Good. Yeah, good. Okay, so turning to some kind of personal questions about this journey, because I think the paper's there, it's solid. Folks can find it in the Signum University Library. This video will be available, and people can reach out to Jacob if they want to see that research, and he's willing to share it. Like, how did this happen for you? How did you stumble upon this idea personally of speech act theory? Yeah, so where did this develop for you?
Yeah, I think from really the first class that I took at Signum, I was kind of doing more research, and I was thinking of Frodo and Sam, specifically in their encounters with Shelob. That kind of like spoke out to me as they are. It seemed to me like a prayer. So I was thinking of the word of faith, logos of faith, like from that moment that they're using their words in faith to pray in these moments. And so from there, it's been like kind of brewing, and I was talking to my mentor Erin Ost on this, giving suggestions. And when I said this to her, she kind of mentioned speech act theory and J.R.R, which I had no idea was even a thing. And so when I searched it up, it made sense in that by saying things, so we are doing things, and so things happen in the world. And so it just made perfect sense to be able to put these two things together of praying and words of faith and speech act theory. So it all kind of like came together in that way.
Good. Yeah. And as soon as I heard it, I think it works. And I had just read, when your proposal came in, I just read a chapter of Serena Higgins' PhD thesis, which had performance and speech act theory with regard to magic on stage, which is pretty cool. And she was able to serve as a second reader, which is neat.
Mm-hmm.
A good opportunity, someone who knew that theory pretty well. I get it. I think did you like Sarah Brown has a great question, which is like, so did you happen to find anything unexpected in your research? Was there anything that popped up that was in the way, or like that didn't kind of figure out super well?
So, kind of almost immediately searching these things in speech act theory and in Tolkien, there's absolutely nothing like between those two things, really. I couldn't find a single thing that had Tolkien and speech act theory and using that in a paper or a chapter or something. And so that immediately kind of made things difficult. And so that's kind of the surprising thing, is that really no one has used speech act theory and Tolkien in any kind of official way that I could search myself. And so really I had to research speech act theory a lot to kind of understand the basic things of how it works. And that led me to being able to use that theory in practice for myself in my thesis. And so it kind of like made me, in a way, pave the way to be able to do this, and for others kind of to, maybe follow an example of also having something to look at to see that they can also use speech act theory in the same way in Tolkien's work.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think it's great. Like Kate Neville says, very cool topic, lots of applicability in many fantasies, very Le Guinian, like Ursula K. Le Guin. And I've sketched this out, Kate, which in Le Guin, and one of my questions is about magic and how that works. And that's why I have that distinction of magic that's endemic to the world, and then magic that seems somehow not just physical, metaphysical or something, right? So where whatever the wizards are doing, the elves seem to me resonant with who they are in Middle Earth, right? So yeah, no, it's a I think it's a great thing, and I love, like, yeah, no, you've got this idea, this cluster of things. It's largely new research for a lot of spaces. The subcreation conversation did root you in some research, right? There were people talking about that,
right,
that you could talk to. Yeah, so that part's helpful, and some theological work was helpful, but you don't want to be in a master's thesis on your own, right? So you need the conversation part.
So yeah, using subcreation, and then from the theological standpoint, then being able to connect that to speech act theory, and then from that I have conversation partners be able to connect that in Tolkien's work. And so it kind of all came together and made sense when I put it all together.
Great. Excellent. This is another one of these thesis theaters that show the work of the whole period of time at Signum, from the first class to the final words of the thesis. And so now I want to thank everyone for coming. There's some comments coming in of encouragement and thanks that are coming in here. Thank you for participating and asking questions. Thanks for those that supported Jacob along the way. Dr. Sarah Brown works as the thesis director and is often shepherding these projects before we see them as supervisors. Dr. Serena Higgins as the second reader, and of those mentors and teachers that you mentioned and conversation partners that you mentioned along the way. And now I also want to congratulate you, Jacob. This is the final moment of your final piece of your master's degree with Signum. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Good stuff. Well, that's, I think, what we're going to do to finish, and more comments coming in here. Thank you so much, Jacob. I'll remind folks that this is going to be available on YouTube, and I hope that you can enjoy this. And like me, you may have to take a bit more time on the anatomy or the architecture of the idea, but grabbing just a few of those moments and you can start to see how that kind of connects. And we can, as fantasy readers, speculative fiction readers, science fiction readers, we can, fairy tale readers, we can reconfigure that speech act conversation. Jacob's thesis just walks us through how to do that, gives some examples, and actually roots it a little deeper in some things we didn't talk about, like Barfield's theory and things like that, right? Yeah, good. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. And for those that are curious, we have quite a number, dozens of these thesis theaters here on the Signum University channel, including a number of them on Tolkien studies topics. We have a full MA in literature, imaginative literature, with Germanic philology and a number of literary pathways for you to study, including Tolkien studies. I would encourage you to reach out to Signum University if you would like to find out more about the MA program, as well as our other open classes and small groups and various kinds of things that happen all through the week and the year here at Signum University. So thank you, everyone, and have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and good night.